Right now, some are listening to the program, some are watching the program on the internet, and there's a horrible oversight, Maureen. They're watching, they're listening, but they're not being taxed for it, and that just can't be.
No kidding. I mean, we've got these state governments and the federal government. They've got big debts, and they're just looking high and low for how they're going to pick your pockets in different ways. Well, the Internet access is something that's actually likely to continue to be protected by something called the Internet Tax Freedom Act. But what we did need to worry about, at least recently, and shockingly, it was our own Senator Enzi who was promoting this, was something called the Marketplace Fairness Act. What that would do is tax Internet sales. And so what we can do is talk today a little bit about how politicians justify this tax, and how they go about trying to get other groups on side to support this tax. Because really, it's a bad tax. It's a tax on innovation, and it's a tax that hurts the very people that Senator Enzi says that he wants to help.
Maureen, I've talked about this many times on the program, but I have on occasion people who call me and ask me questions about the Marketplace Fairness Act or the Internet Sales Tax, which is not, as you just said, it's not a tax on you receiving the internet. It's when you purchase something, but they also wonder, is this an international tax? Is this just a U.S. tax? And if I pay tax for something that I purchased in another state, where does the money go? So how does this work?
Yeah, all those questions are really valid, right? So what this tax would do would be to force retailers to charge taxes to out-of-state online purchasers and then send that tax that it collected back to the state where the purchaser lives. So in other words, if you buy something online and you're in Wyoming and the online seller is in, say, Florida, for instance, that seller in Florida would need to know what the taxes are here. They would need to charge you that tax, and then they would need to send that tax back to the state, back to Wyoming. And the reality is, a lot of times Senator Enzi says, this is not a tax increase, and that is kind of true, because whenever we buy something online, we're not charged sales tax. What we are supposed to do is write up a check and send it off to the Wyoming Department of Revenue. Now, very few people ever bother doing that.
I don't think anybody does.
No, I don't think anybody does. I don't think, and it's not necessarily that people are intentionally evading taxes. It's just that people don't actually know that they're supposed to do that, and so they don't do it. And so it's a lot easier, at least conceptually, for government to try to force businesses to collect that tax than to go around to every single person and every single voter. Of course, this is the underlying problem here for politicians, going to every single voter and saying, look, you need to send us a check for this tax. But one of the big issues here is that every single state has a different tax regime. I mean, I think we talked a couple of weeks ago about the sales tax system here in Wyoming. This state has got a 4% sales tax, and then the counties can add other taxes. There's a 1 cent general purpose tax. There's another additional 1 cent optional purpose tax. Then there's the up to 4% lodging tax. So if we go back to our little mom and pop shop in Florida, how would an organization like that or a company like that be able to keep track of these, which I think we've got an estimate of something like 10,000 different tax regimes.
Right. Now, I interviewed a couple of years ago Senator Enzi on this, and here's how and by the way, that's the last time he ever spoke to me when we got done with that interview. So I can't get him to return any phone calls after that. Okay, here's what he said is supposed to happen. So, and especially after the Obamacare website debacle, Maureen, this is going to go over so well. Local municipalities, and of course we're talking city, county, state, Indian reservation, so it's over 10,000. They are supposed to log in to the federal government website and enter in how much their taxes are, the sales taxes are for that area. So when you are supposed to send the money, let's say, the business you said in Florida, when someone purchases from them, it's supposed to automatically add up on their website. So you're going to send it back to Wyoming, and it's in Gillette, Wyoming, and so this is what you're supposed to send Gillette, and it's just supposed to happen on the internet with a figure right in front of the shopkeeper so he can see what he's supposed to send. Now, after the failure of the Obamacare exchange and the other exchanges across the nation, how well do you think that program is going to work, and how much do you think it's going to cost the federal government to build it?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is just exactly it. You know, the governments are just not good at doing what we call non-core functions, and building websites certainly has proven to be something that governments are just really not very good at doing. And so, luckily, what we saw just, I think it was early last week, we had House Speaker John Boehner come on. He's from Ohio, and he said that he would block the Senate's Marketplace Fairness Act, sponsored by our own Wyoming Senator Enzi, among others. And that's actually really good news, because, in fact, what Senator Enzi was trying to do was tie this Marketplace Fairness Act, this is the Internet Retail Sales Tax Act, to the Internet Tax Freedom Act, which is what we talked about before, the moratorium on any, I don't think there are any actually, but any taxes on Internet access. So that was really, really fantastic news. And, you know, Senator Enzi might not answer you, but his people answer me. So I called up the office, and I wanted to find out, get a comment from Senator Enzi, find out what he thought about this, you know, this great news for people, right? And I got a response from I think it's his policy person. I don't know what his title is exactly, but his name is Daniel Head. So Daniel Head sent me this email, and it said, Senator Enzi continues to believe that Congress can and should pass the Marketplace Fairness Act this year. For over a decade, congressional inaction has created one of the largest loopholes of our lifetime. The federal government should not favor some businesses over other businesses and some taxpayers over other taxpayers. It's time to stop discriminating through the tax code and put local and Main Street retailers on a level playing field with their out-of-state and online counterparts. The Marketplace Fairness Act does this without raising taxes, and this is what I mentioned before. You are actually supposed to send a check to the Revenue Department, of course people do, and without burdening small business, and that is just
yeah.
And it's time to let states make their own fiscal decisions without having first to ask Washington. And, you know, it was kind of funny that Senator Enzi's policy person would say this, because if you go to Senator Enzi's website, I mean, it at least used to say, so this is Senator Enzi, and he's saying, I support pro-growth economic plans that provide welcome relief to taxpayers in every tax bracket, including small business owners, married filers, and individuals who have capital gains or dividend income. By reducing the federal tax burden on individuals and businesses, Wyoming citizens and employers will have more money to spend and create and invest and create jobs. Americans, not the federal government, know best how to spend their hard-earned money. In fact, what Senator Enzi tried to do was force this bad bill through and combine it with the Internet Tax Freedom Act. And the thing is, I mean, if Senator Enzi really wanted to provide relief to taxpayers and small business owners, the very last thing he should be doing is increasing their costs by forcing them to become tax collectors. I mean, if Senator Enzi really believed that Americans, not the federal government, know best how to spend their hard-earned money, instead of sponsoring legislation to collect more taxes from Wyoming citizens, he would leave that money in the pockets of those who know best how to spend their hard-earned money.
Now, just recently, just this past week, I had a friend of mine send me an article from Japan. Japan's falling into a recession. And apparently they were already teetering. See if this sounds familiar. The economy in Japan is struggling and crawling away. And so they decide to go ahead and raise the sales tax. And it just plunged them into recession. Well, there was part 2 of the sales tax that was supposed to happen sometime, beginning of next year. And they're currently having a fight. And don't you love, have you ever seen Japan's parliament fight? I mean, literally, they fight. And they're having a fight right now over the second half of raising taxes that caused the recession in the first place. I look at America now at an economy that's just scraping bottom and struggling along, trying to recover despite the best efforts of government. Let's go ahead and install this tax on the internet, I think we're going to come screeching to a halt.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of problems in Japan. Japan is, we look at Japan and we look at the policies that that government is implementing, and you look at the stagnation that they've had basically since 1989 when they originally fell into recession. We've taken on a lot of the same policies that they have. I mean, this whole quantitative easing, money creation program that they have been doing since the 1990s to stimulate the economy. What did we do? Well, we did the same thing. Did it work? No, it did not. So are we going to raise sales taxes? Well, Japan did it. Gee, it must be good. No, well, no, it's bad. And this is what we're seeing. And we really need to get policymakers to start rejecting these policies that don't work, that really give them this aura of doing something, but they don't work. So we got to stop doing this. We got to start getting back on track and start putting into place policies that are going to encourage people to work, save, and invest instead of discouraging that.
All right, let's see if I can go ahead and take this next call. You're going to hear a couple of pops there, Maureen. And Caleb's on the phone. Hi, Caleb. What you got for us?
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Hey, I just wanted to kind of point out that I don't think that Senator Enzi is, just looking for an excuse to put on another tax. He was a retail business owner.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's just trying to kind of, even the playing field between brick and mortar stores as opposed to like places like Amazon. I mean, I think that's what the goal is. I don't think he's trying to, increase our tax burden any more than what it already is.
So, yeah, Caleb is making actually a really good point, except that what I would say is that instead of...
You're still there, Maureen.
Okay, instead of burdening innovative retailers, people who are trying to get their sales done over the internet, hey, to level the playing field, why doesn't the government reduce the burden on Main Street retailers? Why don't we lower their taxes? Why don't we reduce their regulatory burden? Why do we want to, when we talk about level the playing field, why do we want to make it worse for everybody? Why don't we try to make it better for people who are having trouble competing with these new innovative retailers?
Well, and then I wonder, Maureen, I'm going to jump into the first commercial break here in just a moment, but I kind of wonder, I'm wondering out loud about this, so let me think about it during the course of the break. Because as you know, we've talked long enough. I've run some retail stores and some pretty good size ones sometime back in the past. And okay, so you do have to pay for employees and lights and insurance and brick and mortar and all of that. But if you're an Amazon.com, you're paying for a very big facility, and then everything that somebody buys, you have to ship.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an expense. And so I wonder if these brick and mortar stores actually run with lower overhead or higher overhead, or is the overhead about the same if you have to ship it all over the country, if not all over the world? But hold on, think about that. We'll finish the thought in just a moment.
Oh, now.
So back in with Maureen Bader from Wyoming Liberty Group, and I dropped a little thought in her head, and we went into the commercial break. Maureen, I don't know the numbers on that, but it just seems to me that a place like Amazon.com has to pay a lot of overhead too, because they have to do things like shipping and insurance on what they ship. And with a brick and mortar store, you don't have to worry about those things. So what do you think the costs are like?
Well, it's funny you bring up Amazon, because Amazon.com, in fact, at one time, I think as late as 2012, if I'm not mistaken, was completely against the Internet Retail Sales Tax, or the Main Street Fairness Act, so-called Fairness Act. And then suddenly it changed its tune. Well, I wonder why that was. Well, it actually, in fact, was because Amazon is actually starting a same-day delivery program, and that means it needs to set up a physical location in almost every single state. Now, one of the things we didn't talk about at the beginning, I don't think, is that how this sort of tax situation set itself up in the first place was that back in 1992, there was a Supreme Court decision called Quill versus North Dakota, and the Supreme Court ruled that Internet and catalog retailers shouldn't have to collect state sales taxes unless they had a physical presence in the buyer's state. Well, with this same-day service that Amazon is starting to set up, or it has actually started to set up in different states, what that means is it needs to set up a physical presence in all of these different states, and bingo, it has to collect and remit that tax.
Right.
So now what does it want? Well, it wants all these other little companies that it used to support. It now wants them to pay that tax, become essentially tax collectors for the government as well. It's funny how you get these special interest groups who look at using the government as a way to create an anti-competitive system that benefits themselves, and certainly that's what we're seeing right now with Amazon. But one of the other things that we need to sort of think about is that there are a lot of Main Street retailers, small mom-and-pop shops, that are actually utilizing the Internet as a sales vehicle to help improve their sales and expand their sales. And in fact, right here in Cheyenne, we've got a small bookstore, used bookstore, it's called Phoenix Books. The fellow, he's the sole employee of this. He owns the place. He's the only person who works there. He told me one time, if it hadn't been for the Internet, I would have had to close my doors long ago because I just don't have the sales volume here in Cheyenne. And what Senator Enzi would want him to do is actually become a tax collector for the state, impose this huge burden on him. I mean, how can one person alone use a non-functioning, it's not currently non-existing, but eventually probably non-functioning government set up website to then figure out what the taxes are going to be in all these different, in Poughkeepsie, and then actually remit all this tax to all these different states. I mean, it's just completely unreasonable.
Well, I don't understand. That was the most confusing part, and that's where I think Senator Enzi started to hate me. Is I said, okay, let's say I'm a Wyoming brick and mortar store, and the state of Wyoming said that if I sold something on the Internet, that I needed to collect Wyoming sales tax and send it to Wyoming. Well, I'm already doing it. If I'm a brick and mortar store, nothing has changed. Why would I collect it and send it to the guy in California or where he lives in California? And then I asked, what happens if I don't collect it? What if I just decide I'm not going to collect it? And he said, well, then auditors from California could show up at your store. And I said, there's no way in hell, that's where he started to hate me, I think, I would allow auditors from California in my store to look at my books in Wyoming. It isn't going to happen. This thing is going to be a mess. Why do they have it backwards? Why would I collect for another state?
Well, exactly, because, I mean, if we get right down to fundamentals, supposedly, of course, this is a fundamental that's long been undermined, but supposedly we pay taxes in exchange for the provision of goods and services. What goods and services are we receiving from the California government, other than Californians who come here, right? Because they've left the high tax regime in California. Yeah. So this is I think these fundamental principles are what have been long undermined, and that's what allows the government to get away with trying to impose these kinds of unfair tax burdens on people.
All right, Maureen, where do they find you and your work?
Yes, you can find lots of background information on this if you go to our website, wyliberty.org. Go to blogs and then hit my name, and you'll see everything that I've written on all kinds of things that we've talked about today, including the Internet retail sales tax.
All right. Always good to talk to you. Thank you for coming on.
Great to be here. Talk to you later.